Was Los Angeles founded by a Filipino? Most people think that they know LA, but what if a forgotten Filipino had a surprising role in its founding? Recently, a short video claimed that a Filipino founded Los Angeles. Now, while this video caught a lot of attention online, there's so much more to this topic that they're not telling you. As someone who grew up in both Angeles City, Philippines and Los Angeles, California, I've always felt connected to the histories of these two cities of angels that are separated by the vast Pacific Ocean, yet are actually more intertwined than most people think. I've actually shared this history before in my older videos and in my lectures, but today let's dive even deeper into the journey of a man whose life reveals a forgotten chapter in California's history. Mabuhay or in Kapampangan, luwid kayo. It's me, Kirby Araullo, your friendly Pinoy historian. But before we get started, I just want to take a moment to talk about the wildfires that is currently happening in Southern California. So many families, including members of our Filipino community, have been affected and displaced. So if you or someone you know has been impacted, I've added a list of resources and the many ways to help the communities in need. So please check out the links below, the pinned comment below for this list, and help us spread the word. Let's embody the Bayanihan spirit of our people. So what does a man from Manila have anything to do with the founding of Los Angeles? Los Angeles was officially founded on September 4, 1781 as El Pueblo de Nuestra Señora la Reina de los Ángeles de Porciúncula, or in English, the town of Our Lady, the Queen of the Angels of Porciúncula. And this is the origin of today's Los Angeles. And this pueblo, or colonial town, was founded by 11 families, or Los Pobladores del Pueblo de Los Ángeles, who were settlers from New Spain, or modern-day Mexico. And their names are forever etched into history and engraved on monuments throughout LA. But did you know that there was supposed to be a 12th Poblador, or founder? And that missing Poblador was a man from Manila named Antonio Miranda y Rodriguez. But it's important for us to remember and acknowledge that long before 1781, the land we now call Los Angeles was home to the Indigenous Tongva people, along with neighboring Chumash, Tataviam, and other communities in Greater LA. And for centuries, they lived in harmony with the land, developing complex societies, cultures, and spiritual practices. But then, the arrival of the Spaniards brought drastic changes with the establishment of the pueblo, marking the beginning of colonial influence that would forever alter their homeland. Now, in early 1781, Antonio Miranda y Rodriguez was a 50-year-old widower from Manila who was actually traveling with his 11-year-old daughter as part of the pobladores who were designated to, lay the foundations in what is now LA. But sadly, on their way up north to Los Angeles, in what was then known as Alta California, while traveling on foot with the rest of the pobladores, Antonio and his daughter fell ill. They got sick with smallpox or bulutong in Tagalog, which was then very prevalent in the region. And so they had no choice but to stay behind in Baja California to recover, hoping to feel better before proceeding to Los Angeles. Now, tragically, his daughter did not survive the illness. She passed away from smallpox. Fast forward to 1783, when Antonio finally reached Los Angeles, only to find that the land that was originally allotted to him or assigned to him was already given to somebody else. I mean, just imagine the heartbreak of, losing his daughter only to arrive in LA and find that the land that was promised to him had already been taken away and given to somebody else. But luckily for Antonio, his life story did not end with his heartbreak or this loss of land in LA. Recognizing his gunsmithing skills, the Spanish authorities reassigned Antonio from Los Angeles to the Presidio in Santa Barbara. They saw the value of his talents in weapon making, and he was then promoted and reassigned to settle in what was then the more prestigious town of Santa Barbara in October of 1783. And Antonio served as a weapons maker at El Presidio Real de Santa Barbara, or the Royal Fortified Military Base that protected a huge chunk of today's Southern California. And just like many other Luzones Indios of the 1500s to the 1700s, Antonio's expertise reflected the broader reputation of early Filipinos as highly skilled laborers and craftsmen in the Spanish colonies. Whether it was building Spanish missions, building galleons, cultivating land, or serving to protect their communities, these Luzones were indispensable to these early colonial societies. And Antonio was not the only early Filipino to make an impact in California. In fact, unknown to many, the Spaniards frequently brought Luzones Indios from the Philippines in their expeditions and missions across Asia and the Pacific. For instance, Vicente Tallado, an Indio de la Pampanga, was among those who accompanied Father Junipero Serra at the San Carlos Mission in Monterrey back in 1779. And actually, Monterrey back then was the capital of Alta California. Then in 1795, records show that 20 other Luzones Indios were baptized by Father Serra at the nearby mission in Santa Barbara, the same place where Antonio had settled a decade prior. But of course, the Spaniards did not just rely on cooperation. They often used divide and conquer tactics to maintain control. They often pitted indigenous groups from different colonies against one another, and this ensured that the Spanish Empire advanced smoothly and expanded, but often left these communities fractured and exploited. And again, unknown to many, under Spanish rule, the Luzones Indios were crucial to building the missions and the towns that laid the groundwork for California's earliest colonial settlements. And if we look at the records, the vast majority of these Luzones Indios came from La Pampanga, which during this time was a vast colonial province in the Philippines, stretching across what are now the modern-day provinces of Central Luzon. And today we know them as the Kapampangans, who remain an integral part of Luzon's history and identity. And these Luzones Indios contributed their skills to shaping the earliest colonial communities in California, and their expertise in agriculture, navigation, carpentry, and craftsmanship was not just valued, it was indispensable to the Spaniards. While the skills of these Luzones Indios were indispensable and actually helped in the flourishing of colonial California, their contributions came at a cost. Like the indigenous peoples of California, these early native Filipinos often worked under coercion in the most dangerous conditions. They often lost their freedom, and in many cases, they were displaced from their motherlands and disconnected from our cultures. It is a legacy woven with both resilience and suffering, a legacy as inspiring as it was heartbreaking. And yet, the contributions of these early native Filipinos were actually shaped by a rigid colonial caste system, a racist system that ranked people according to their ancestry, according to the color of their skin, and often treated many people as less than human. While many refer to him as Antonio Miranda Rodriguez or simply Antonio Rodriguez, his actual last name was Miranda. The Rodriguez part was likely added due to the Spanish naming conventions, which combined both the father's and the mother's last names. And this practice often leads to confusion when interpreting historical records from Spanish to English. Now, in some Spanish records, Antonio Miranda y Rodriguez was actually listed as Chino. And because of this, many have asked me, does this mean that he was Chinese? The answer is, no, not quite. Not really. Chino back then was a term often used in colonial Mexico to describe Asians more broadly. But unknown to many, during this time, the vast majority of Asians in the Americas were mostly early native Filipinos, like the Luzones Indios. And this is an example of how interconnected and deeply stratified the Spanish Empire was, where diverse peoples like early Filipinos, Mexicans, and Native Americans lived and worked side by side, but under a colonial system, a society that often exploited and dehumanized them. So why were early Filipinos like Antonio listed as Chinos? Many may not know this, but during the colonial period, the term Chino was a racial label used to distinguish native Filipinos from indigenous peoples of Mexico. Because back then, the indigenous peoples of the Philippines and the Native Americans of Mexico were all called Indios. So to avoid confusion, the Spanish colonial society in Mexico used the term Chino or Indios Chinos to refer to the natives of the Philippines living in Mexico. And again, many of them were listed in colonial records as Luzones Indios or Indios Chinos de la Pampanga. And this is why many believe that Antonio Miranda y Rodriguez was most likely a Spanish Kapampangan mestizo. It is also very important for us to remember to understand that back then, the term Filipino did not mean what it does today. Back then, Filipino was a label exclusively used to refer to the pure-blooded white Spaniards born in the Philippines. And this definition excluded indigenous peoples from the Philippines and people of mixed ancestry like Antonio, who were then categorized as something else in this complicated colonial caste system. These terms were not always consistent. In fact, sometimes they're overlapping, even changing depending on who was recording them. Hence why people like Antonio is sometimes referred to as a Luzon Indio or a Chino or an Indio Chino. And this reflects the racial hierarchy and discrimination that were baked into the Spanish colonial society. And if we think about it, this colonial caste system left a lasting impact on the identities of modern-day Filipinos and other colonized peoples across the Pacific and the Americas, shaping how they were viewed across generations and how we view ourselves today. And this is why there's always a lot of confusion, even amongst Filipinos ourselves, on whether or not Filipinos are Asians, or Pacific Islanders, or even Hispanics. So comment below if you would like me to dig deeper into these questions in future videos. But for now, let's go back to Los Angeles. Now, over the years, people have asked me, Kuya Kirby, are there any connections between Angeles City and Los Angeles, in the Philippines and California, given their shared names as cities of angels? Now, the answer to this question is both yes and no, so let me explain. So apart from being both known as cities of angels, people also wonder about a possible connection because Antonio shared the same last name, Miranda, with another Spanish Kapampangan mestizo, Don Angel Pantaleon de Miranda, who in 1796 founded a settlement in La Pampanga called Culiat, or what we now call Angeles City. And this connection raises the intriguing question of whether or not the two pioneers were related. While we haven't found any evidence of a direct link between the two, their shared surname of Miranda and their ties to La Pampanga are definitely interesting. Maybe it's just a coincidence. But then again, who knows? After all, there's a ton of fascinating details hidden beneath our forgotten histories. Just waiting for us to dig deeper and find them through further research. But what about their namesakes? Are Los Angeles, California and Angeles City, Philippines named after one another? Or are they even named after the same thing? The answer is no, they're not named after one another. And no, they're not also named after the same thing, despite their shared theme of angels. The etymology or the roots of their names shows us that they have distinct origins. Angeles City, Philippines was named after its founder, Don Angel Pantaleon de Miranda, and after the city's titular patron, Los Santos Angeles Custodios, the Holy Guardian Angels. Meanwhile, Los Angeles in California was named after the Virgin Mary. In fact, as mentioned, when LA was founded in the 1780s, the full name was El Pueblo de Nuestra Señora la Reina de Los Angeles de Porciúncula, or in English, the town of the Queen of the Angels of Porciúncula, referring to the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus. While on the other hand, Angeles City's full name in Spanish was El Pueblo de los Santos Angeles Custodios, or the town of the Holy Guardian Angels. And both these names reflect the Spanish colonial influence and the deeper role of religion and the Catholic Church in naming these settlements. So while their etymologies are distinct, they still share a subtle connection. One is the city of the angels, Angeles City, while the other one is the city of the Queen of the Angels, Los Angeles. And if you think about it, in a way, they're still both considered cities of angels, linking them in spirit, even if not directly linked in origins. Now, despite these Catholic names, it is important for us to remember that before Spanish colonialism reshaped these regions, both what are now Angeles City, Philippines and Los Angeles, California were already home to indigenous peoples. Unknown to many, Angeles City was originally inhabited by the Aitas, who were pushed out in the late 1700s. Similarly, Los Angeles in California displaced Native Americans like the Tongva, Tataviam, Chumash, and many others to make way for Spanish colonial settlements. And this also happened around the same time, back in the late 1700s onwards. Now, both these cities of angels share this complex and complicated history of displacing indigenous populations during the Spanish colonial period. Antonio's journey from Manila to Baja California, then from Los Angeles to Santa Barbara, reflects a timeless truth about the immigrant experience, adapting to unforeseen challenges, navigating and embracing new opportunities, and building a legacy across the seas. Antonio's resilience mirrors that of the present-day Filipino American communities. In fact, unknown to many, Greater LA or Greater Los Angeles is actually home to the largest concentration of Filipino population outside the Philippines, boasting over 600,000 Filipinos whose contributions have shaped the region all the way back from the 1700s to the vibrant communities we see today. And while many people think that the current wildfires in Southern California or SoCal only affect the wealthy areas, the reality on the ground is different. Unknown to many, the hardest hit of these disasters are actually the working class families and the vulnerable migrant communities, many of them Filipino Americans, who are part of LA County's predominantly working class population. But despite this, even during these current wildfires and disasters, Filipino Americans have stepped up in countless ways to help their communities, showing the same spirit of resilience and solidarity, the same bayanihan spirit we inherited from our ancestors. From organizing relief efforts to providing direct care, Filipino workers have played a critical role during these emergencies. Like for example, our Filipino caregivers in LA, they've been helping patients evacuate, supporting those in need out of their own pockets, and they often make personal sacrifices to ensure the safety of others. And moments like this reminds us of the enduring strength, the unshakable resilience, and the spirit of community that continues to define our people's collective journey in history. From the Luzones Indios who helped lay the foundations of early California, to the Manongs who fought for labor rights, and to the Filipino Americans who continue to uplift our communities today. So back to our question, was LA founded by a Filipino? While Antonio Miranda y Rodriguez did not officially make the list of LA's founders, his journey highlights the often overlooked contributions of Filipinos to California's history. Indeed, Antonio's journey is a reminder that history is not just about the famous names etched in stones. It is also about the lives and the legacies that quietly shaped the world we live in today. And Antonio's story is just one chapter in a much bigger narrative, in a much deeper history. So if you're curious about the broader history of Filipinos in America, don't forget to check out my other videos on the first Filipinos in America. And with that being said, I would like to take this moment to recognize and give a special shout out and a special thank you to all the Filipino organizations, individuals, and businesses who have been stepping up to help our communities in need during these wildfires, like NAFCON, or the National Alliance for Filipino Concerns, the Filipino Migrant Center, SoCal Filipinos, fil-am Arts, Island Pacific Supermarkets, Chef Roline, and so many others. Their hard work highlights the community's commitment to supporting one another in times of need, embodying the bayanihan spirit we inherited from our ancestors. And in the same spirit, proceeds from this video and my book sales this month will also be donated to NAFCON's Bayanihan Relief. So make sure to check out the links below to learn more about how you can support these efforts and make a difference in our communities. Maraming salamat po Orin Kapampangan, dakal pong salamat kay Kongan, and in Ilocano, agyaman aklaunay. See you next time in Tagalog kita kits and in Kapampangan, Mikitix, and in Binisaya, kita aita.